So we're still just about in the Epiphany season, and we have been thinking in past weeks about new beginnings. That's the common thread. And we saw a new beginning this week, did we not, with the inauguration of Donald Trump as President of the United States of America. There was a lot of pizzazz and partying, and also the opening speech, in which the other was identified and dismissed in clear terms. Migrants, people who don't fit the heterosexual paradigm, climate change, and even the World Health Organization, you're all out. A largely prejudiced and aggressively negative agenda then. But the only really positive thing was the first attempt to get Putin to stop the war in the Ukraine, but even that came with threats. We can safely say the Trump regime is exclusivist. You're in, welcome, you're out, clear off. Rule by intimidation and enforced conformity. And all of this, we were told, is coming our way because God saved Trump from the assassin's bullet. This, it is claimed, is a divine agenda. There was one small voice raised to suggest a different priority in the whole of the official junketing. Bishop Marion Edgar Budd begged Trump to have mercy on those who were fearful, including immigrants and LGBTQ plus people. Trump's response at the end of the service, predictably dismissive, not a very good service. They could do much better. So was the bishop wrong? Or has she actually done what someone like Ambrose or Chrysostom did in their day, standing up against powerful imperial rulers and correctly speaking up for justice? So let's see what today's readings have to say as we ponder that little question. Firstly, we had a rare appearance on a Sunday from Nehemiah. Now, St. Jerome was terribly not keen on this book, and he left it out of his Bible reading syllabus entirely. The piece we heard today was the inauguration of a new chapter in the life of Israel as they emerge from exile. It is Nehemiah and Ezra's attempt to make Israel great again. That's exactly what's going on. The restoration of the nation after the Babylonian captivity, as it's sometimes called. Jerusalem and the temple had to be physically rebuilt. But instead of returning to the monarchical government of the past, i.e. kings, they went for theocracy instead, ruled by priesthood. We heard how some version of the Torah was read out loud and then interpreted to the people. And their reaction is one of sorrow and weeping because they can see that this version of the law, at least, is not how they've been living. So they feel like they've fallen short of God's standards. At least we can say that's how Ezra has presented it to them. And there are hard choices ahead for them. And one of these is the breakup of families. Any non-Jewish spouses had to be sent packing. No aliens or foreigners allowed. Nevertheless, everyone is sent home to have a feast, have a party, because the day is holy to the Lord. I think we can safely say that the Ezra-Nehemiah program is a purist one based on exclusivism. Their aim is to return to a purely Jewish society in order to please God and therefore ensure that there is no repetition of conquest and exile, which is what they've recently been through. Did that work? We can talk to Alison about the ins and outs of what happens next, but clearly it did not prevent conquest by the Greeks and then by the Romans, and ultimately it did not prevent the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. However, a Torah-based expression of the Jewish faith has endured both through rabbinical Judaism and in Christianity. So it's not a total failure in some respects, but I think we would have to say it is not at all what Esther and Nehemiah envisaged, especially the Christianity part of that. So that's the first reading. Let's make Israel great again. Our epistle, that marvellous passage in St. Paul writing to the Christians in Corinth, and clearly it is the polar opposite, is it not, of the not really us, let's cut it out policy. This is about radical inclusion. Embrace all the parts, recognise each part has its own proper place and function. No one bit is more essential than another, and only when everything is included can the body function properly. Now, let's not pretend this is not without its challenges as well, because even as individuals, we find it hard to accept parts of our own body. Some people have managed it, and they are noticeably content, but many of us are still working on a full acceptance of ourselves as we are. There would be no beauty industry or fitness industry otherwise. As for applying Paul's image to families, communities, nations, i.e. more complicated scenarios, well, we can see for ourselves how that is going. Because it is all too easy for us to see difference and then label it as inferior and or a threat and push it away. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. More sinister still is the move from that into, you are actually the cause of my problems, you are the reason I do not function properly. And then we begin to see, do we not, it's the opposite of the truth that Paul is trying to convey. So in our reading so far, we have met exclusivism as a way forward and inclusivity as the only way to function. What has Jesus to say? Now, that passage from Luke 4 is one of my all-time favourites. It always hits the mark. It inspires and challenges at the same time. Jesus quotes those words from Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." And then extraordinarily, he says to everybody, that just came true here and now, in your presence, in your hearing. I mean, can you imagine it? They've been reading that scripture for centuries. And then this scruffy individual gets up and says, yep, I'm it. That is real restoration, isn't it? That promise there. And what does it tell us? It tells us that it's the poor and the weak who are going to get the benefits. And we know that the earliest Christians did indeed focus on helping the poor. They brought medicine and healing to many. They educated women as well as men. They provided shelter, food, clothing, and the redemption of debt to many. They literally got people out of prison, released them from slavery. They exercised compassion and generosity. And they encouraged a style of living which was like that envisaged in the Torah, not that far removed from Ezra and Nehemiah after all. But it has this inclusivist edge to it. It's the interpretation that is different. The Spirit of the Lord produces these priorities of liberation. There is no message here of fear or removing the unwanted, the despised, or the other. If the Lord really thought in that way, then we would all be doomed. The Lord reaches out to the least in society, the deprived, the prisoners, the slaves, the blind, the oppressed. And we heard, didn't we, just a few weeks ago at Christmas, the angels promising peace on earth to everyone of goodwill. So let us today, bearing that in mind, respond with feasting. It is the Lord's day, not from any place of fear or sorrow. We step out with Jesus on this path of mercy, kindness, and yes, inclusion. We rejoice to welcome all to the table as friends because God has welcomed us, warts and all. Do we want to be great? Or should we aspire to be holy? The makers and bringers of shalom. The bringers of shalom to all. I suggest that's why we say we are an Easter people.